Enjoy early access to ad-free episodes each week when you subscribe to Wedding Planning Podcast Premium in Apple Podcasts. Enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wedding Planning Podcast, a really big and very important topic, setting a realistic wedding budget that works for you. This is one of the first steps you'll take after getting engaged, and ideally before making any big wedding decisions. So if you are newly engaged or maybe just need a wedding budget reset, welcome, and you're in the right place. Now, to streamline the process of setting a realistic wedding budget, today I'm going to be sharing a step-by-step guide on exactly how to do this. We want you to have a budget that gives you plenty of space for the things that you value the most. A wedding planning experience without any financial stress is, quite honestly, probably unlikely. Let's face it, anytime we're investing thousands of dollars in something, that comes along with some doubts and anxiety, and it definitely warrants some close thought and ongoing maintenance of expectations. But I am here to break things down into manageable pieces so that this is not overwhelming, this is not stressful. And with that, I'm going to launch into my list of 10 steps to wedding budget success. Now, step number 1, this is fairly self-explanatory, is that you're going to start by determining how much you're willing and able to spend on your wedding. So let's call this setting a total budget limit. Now, when you come up with this number, you're going to consider your current savings, any contributions that you'll be receiving from family members, and any other sources of funding. So, for example, if you foresee being engaged for the next 12 months, you could create a little side savings account over the next 12 months, and putting just $400 away each month would give you nearly $5,000 at the end of the year. So that's what I mean by other sources of funding. Now, a very high-level tip that we will repeat over and over again is that you do need to be realistic about what you can afford, and keep in mind that weddings can quickly become more expensive than anticipated. Understatement of the day. And equally as important, back to the realistic piece, is you do need to be realistic about how much things actually cost in your marketplace. Hosting a $10,000 wedding for 100 guests in a major city marketplace at a traditional all-inclusive venue on a Saturday evening in May is probably not realistic. It's possible to do, but you're going to need to be very creative about swaps and saves, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But for today's purposes, do yourself a favor and just be prepared to be sticker shocked. Be prepared to create a list of your personal must-haves and your personal non-negotiables, and most importantly, prepare to be flexible. We'll talk about all of these points in more detail throughout today's show, but to round out step number 1, here are a couple of to-do items for you. First off, discuss your budget boundaries and your budget ideas with your partner. The two of you should sit down and have an uninterrupted, open, candid conversation about both of your expectations, your priorities, and your financial limitations. This is not necessarily a fun and joyful conversation for everybody to have, but just do yourselves a favor, carve out a time, sit down, and get it all aired out and all out in the open. And then secondly, you will also need to consult with your family. If family members will be contributing to the wedding or might be contributing to the wedding and you don't know that, you don't have a clear answer, you do want to have a very candid discussion on how much they are willing to contribute to help you, if they are willing to contribute and help you. This is much easier said than done. I am personally not a huge fan of discussing money with my parents and my family, but the risk of making assumptions and winding up in a financial bind because of those assumptions, that can be really, really messy for some couples. So, for example, if you are just assuming that your parents are going to contribute $10,000 to your wedding, and you go out and make a bunch of commitments and deposits and sign a bunch of contracts, only to find out that your parents have a financial situation that you may not be aware of, and actually they cannot contribute $10,000 to your wedding, and they actually can't contribute anything to your wedding. Now you have overextended yourself with commitments that you don't necessarily have the budget to pay for, and we definitely want to avoid that. Okay, moving on to step 2 in creating your wedding budget. Prioritizing your must-haves, your non-negotiables. I hope you had a chance to listen to the Engagement Starter Kit bonus series that was released the first week of January. So as this show is coming out, that was just a couple weeks ago. In part 2, and that's dated January 2nd, you'll find my detailed steps for uncovering your top wedding priorities. That episode is a must listen, and I will say all those 4 bonus episodes I think are a must listen. Definitely go back and check those out if you missed it. I'm not going to rehash the whole discussion here, but I will say this. Skipping this step of identifying your priorities or glossing over it might not seem like a big deal now, but if you fast forward to 12 months from now, when you realize that you're paying for a bunch of wedding crap that's not even that important to you, that's a big deal. This can snowball. So do this exercise, identify your main priorities. And once you have those outlined, you're going to have a guide for exactly where to allocate the majority of your wedding budget. Because guess what? If it's really, really important to you and it really is a priority, then you owe it to yourself to put more of your wedding budget into those items versus the things that are not that important to you. Those can be scaled way back or maybe even cut out entirely. And this part gets missed by so many engaged couples, so come back to me if you're multitasking. There's no point in setting your priorities and making your non-negotiables unless you're willing to commit to them, and this means consistently saying no to the things that didn't make the cut. This, my friend, is my magical formula for getting most or all of the things that you want most, no matter what your overall wedding budget is, and that is a win-win. So now we come to number 3 for today, which is what are the main wedding budget categories? Weddings come with a wide variety of expenses, and it can be really helpful in the beginning to assign your total budget into categories. So here's a list of some of the major categories to consider. And for a written recap of this list that I'm going to go through pretty quickly, you can head to our website, weddingplanningpodcast.co/wedding-budget, and you'll also find that link in today's show notes when you have a hands-free moment. So here we go. Some of the major categories to consider are your venue. This could include ceremony and reception venues, and sometimes will even include catering. If it doesn't include catering, then that's a separate line item, so food and drinks. And of course, this is going to depend big time on the number of guests, the type of meal, and your location. Another major category, attire. So dresses, suits, shoes, accessories, alterations. Moving on, photography and videography, entertainment, flowers and decorations, a wedding planner, stationery, hair and makeup, transportation, favors and gifts, and honeymoon. Yes, I know I went through those really quickly. No, that list is not all inclusive. And no, just because I read off a line item, it does not mean that it applies to you or your situation. So please add and subtract to this list based on your personal circumstances, your personal priorities. But those categories are an overview and a good starting point. And that leads us into number 4, which is to start researching and start to estimate costs for each category. So once you have a handle on the major elements and categories that are appropriate for your wedding vision, you'll need to research the actual costs for each category in your area. This is a big job, so don't get overwhelmed because on the surface, again, this is hours of work. This isn't something that you're going to press pause on this podcast episode and hammer it all out in a 20-minute lunch break. So be prepared to take this in pieces. Be prepared to work on it over time. It's a work in progress. Also know that prices, as you'll find as you're researching, prices are going to vary widely depending on your location, the season, and the style that you're looking for. It is impossible for me to give a generalized blanket statement about how much things will cost for you or how much things should cost. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but in terms of budget calculators that assign percentages to each of the categories, whatever works for you, I'm not a huge fan just because I feel like it makes a big generalization again, and this is so specific to you and your situation and your priorities. So I'm not going to sit here and say your venue should be 20% of your overall budget, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very individual, very case-by-case thing, and it will unfold for you as you follow these steps and trust the process. So sorry, that was a little bit of a sidetrack, but back to researching and estimating costs. Your main action item here is really to hit the internet and just start filling out requests for more information, book information meetings, book some venue tours, ask your friends and family for referrals, and then start to fill in your category list with some estimated pricing information. Now we have some really good fundamentals, and we can't go further until we talk about getting organized. So number 5 for today is to get organized using spreadsheets or a wedding budget app. I don't care how you do it, however it works for you. Nothing we've talked about up to this point is going to do any good whatsoever if it's not organized. And ideally, I would recommend putting it somewhere that's shareable, that's online, and that's accessible to your partner and anyone else who's helping you plan. If you don't like running things like this online and you'd prefer a wedding notebook, that's fine too. But some great, easy ways to get organized are using Google Docs, a wedding planning app, or just a plain old spreadsheet. In terms of free, flexible, easy to use apps, I would suggest Wedding Wire or The Knot, but there are dozens and dozens, countless numbers of them out there. So look around and choose whatever works best for you. In the beginning of formulating your budget and in the beginning of the process, this is where you're going to input your estimated costs for each category. So the numbers that you got in step number 4 when you started researching, go ahead and outline all of that here. And then as you research and gather more information and start to narrow down your options, this is also where you can keep track of vendor quotes and contact information. And eventually it's where you'll keep track of your deposits and your payments and your balances due. So you're going to add columns for deposit amounts that you've paid, due dates for balances that are due, and you're always going to be on top of exactly what needs to be paid and when. So we're feeling organized, we're on top of it. The next thing we're going to do is plan for the unexpected. What an oxymoron that is. More often than not, weddings do come with unexpected expenses. I don't know a couple who's ever just not experienced any unexpected money due. The reality is that more often than not, weddings come with unexpected expenses. And I could say the same for life in general. But since we're talking about weddings, let's stick there. I would recommend that you set aside about 5 to 10% of your total budget for unplanned costs. No one likes unplanned costs. No one likes an unexpected bill, but it happens. So go ahead and be proactive about it. And this gives you peace of mind. If something does go over budget, you're prepared for it. And if you are superhuman and disciplined and perfectly on budget from start to finish, then congratulations. You will have a surprise little wedding gift to yourselves when it's all over. You can enjoy that 10% that you set aside and go ahead and do something fun with it or productive, whatever you choose. Next up here, you're going to actively track your spending. Actively meaning regularly, consistently. As you start booking vendors, you start paying deposits and buying various things, go in and update your budget regularly. Staying consistent with these check-ins makes sure that you're not overspending in one area. And if you do overspend in one area, you can catch it before that train kind of goes out of control. You can review your budget weekly, monthly, however it makes sense for you. Schedule a time. It can be with your partner. It can be just you solo. Everyone delegates this differently. Just make sure to set aside some time to check on your progress and make any adjustments as necessary. And then also here, be flexible and be realistic. Okay, things happen. We overspend. We don't anticipate perfectly. That's totally fine. If you need to cut back in a specific area, now is the time to flag that and make the adjustments. This is why we do it regularly, monthly, weekly, and not at the end when things have gone out of control for 12 months and you're just now catching it. So this gives you an opportunity to jump in there and kind of catch things before they get out of hand. And then I'll say here too, your priorities can change. This goes back to earlier in the show when we talked about setting your non-negotiables and setting your priorities. Maybe at the beginning of your engagement, you thought that videography was a must-have, but you've since then come across some alternatives that are going to work out just fine. And you want to take those videography funds and go ahead and move them into another category. Don't be afraid to pivot. Just make sure that you're balancing your splurges and your saves so that your bottom line remains the same. So if you need to take from one category, that's fine. Just make sure you're compensating for it on the other side. We can't have a conversation about a wedding budget without also talking about some cost savings opportunities. And this is a huge topic. I'm going to touch on it really briefly here, just because, again, I don't feel like a conversation is complete without touching on it. If your budget is tight and you want to save money in some certain areas, here are some easy starting points to consider, and I'm going to go through these quickly. Number one would be your venue. So considering a non-traditional venue like a park or a family home, a backyard, this can save huge on rental fees. So it's just something to think about. You can consider cutting back on decorations or even doing your own decorations. Centerpieces and flowers are an easy way, an easy place to start. And you will find a million ideas on DIY projects if you head to the internet, Pinterest, YouTube, Reddit, etc., etc. Another really low-hanging fruit cost-saving opportunity is your guest list. The fewer people you invite, the less expensive your overall price tag is going to be, to put it in the most simple terms. Hosting an off-season wedding is another great savings opportunity. And then last one here, keep it simple. Yes, it is that easy, and these are words to live by in my personal book. I could literally talk for an hour about examples and scenarios where keeping it simple can save thousands upon thousands of dollars, but that's another conversation for another day. Likewise, there are opportunities everywhere to make a creative swap, substitution, or even omission. If it's not on your priority list and it's not important to you, then skip it. Again, cost-saving opportunities, huge topic, way too much to discuss in today's episode. I could literally talk about this stuff for days, and I can't wait to share more here each week about more creative cost-saving opportunities that you can take advantage of. And as we start to wind up the show, we've got just a couple things left. I want to add a note about using credit cards or debt to pay for your wedding. I've been doing this for a really long time, and credit card and debt are bad words in the world of wedding planning on a budget. In the most general terms, in a most perfect world, I would suggest that you host a wedding that you can afford today, right now. However, I'm not here to judge anyone or their decisions or individual situations, and I've had many conversations with engaged couples where it actually does make sense, given their unique situation, to take on some debt to pay for their weddings. That may or may not be right for you, but I do feel it's worth mentioning that there is a gray area, there is flexibility and creativity that exists beyond what we've been conditioned to think is right or wrong. So do with that what you will. We're going to move into number 10, which is keeping things in perspective. This is actually a teaser into another much larger topic, which is knowing when to flex your money-saving muscles and when it might be better to trade your time for dollars and just pay a professional rather than trying to do it yourself. If you want to make your own centerpieces because you find joy in the process and it makes you happy and you're really excited about it, then that's great. But if you're dedicating hours of time and hundreds of dollars in supplies because you think it's going to save you money at the end of the day, there are endless, easier ways to save a couple $100, and we'll explore those here in upcoming weekly episodes. And to tie a bow on everything, we're going to finish here with review and adjust. Repeat after me. Review and adjust. As you get closer to your wedding day, go back in and reassess your budget. Make sure it's still working for you. Make sure it's still speaking to your current priorities, your current must-haves, your current non-negotiables. Like I said earlier in the show, these things change, and that's fine. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to make adjustments. Unexpected costs will pop up, which is no problem, right? Because we're prepared for that. And some categories may end up costing less than you initially expected. Keep your priorities top of mind and make adjustments as you go. I will share a complete outline of today's episode in a blog post that you can find at weddingplanningpodcast.co/wedding-budget. And there's also a link to that in today's show notes for whenever you have a hands-free moment. I know for me, it helps to hear the information and then also to see it written out. So that's always an option on our website under the podcast episodes tab. You can always find a written recap of any show. In addition to the written version of today's episode, I also included an example wedding budget breakdown, and that can be really helpful to seeing and understanding the overall financial picture given those main wedding spending categories that we reviewed earlier. Last important note, whether you're in the early stages of formulating your overall wedding vision or you've got a specific wedding scenario that you'd like to review in detail, I do have one-on-one calls available each month, and you can learn more and book your time on our website, weddingplanningpodcast.co, and look for the Work With Me link at the top. And that's that for today. I hope you found this conversation helpful. Thank you so much for joining me and for letting me be a part of your wedding planning days. It is a huge honor. I do not take it lightly, and I love having these conversations with you. I look forward to talking again next week, same time, same place.